The first contact didn't come as a beam of light over Washington or a ring of ships above the equator. It came as a distressed ping from Research Station Persephone, latitude 28.4, longitude 45.7 west, and then, nothing. 47 seconds of garbled telemetry, a crunch of static and silence so complete it had weight. Peter. Mara Vasquez heard it from the galley of the observation sloop, Constant, where she was eating rehydrated rice and arguing with herself about whether she'd made a mistake leaving the university. He put her bowl down. She didn't pick it up again for 11 days. She was 26, 2 weeks removed from defending her dissertation on deep ocean thermocline disruption, and the only reason she was on this boat instead of on a flight home was that Dr. Alara Osi had offered her a field position 2 hours after her committee shook her hand. Osi ran Persephone, DD. Osi was brilliant and impatient, and the kind of person who didn't wait for grants to tell her what questions mattered. When the ping went dead, Mara was 6 nautical miles from the station's coordinates, close enough to smell the brine differently. Something underneath the salt, something wrong, like the sea itself, that had turned a temperature it wasn't supposed to have. She was up the ladder and in the wheelhouse before the sloop's emergency system finished its alert cycle. The others were 3 activists from an environmental collective. Greg, who piloted the sloop and had shoulders like a shipping container. Allison, who documented everything with a camera that never seemed to leave her hand. And Ryan, who had once, by his own account, free-dived 40 meters on a single breath and considered this the most important thing about himself. None of them were scientists. All of them were brave in the performative way of people who hadn't yet seen something that made bravery feel small. What breached the surface 112 meters from the constant starboard bow made bravery feel very small indeed. The first thing Mara registered was the displacement wave, a rolling swell that shouldn't have existed in calm water, the kind of hydrodynamic signature you'd expect from something the size of a military submarine, then the dorsal fin, then the second dorsal fin offset laterally too far to the left to belong to the same animal on any morphological chart she'd ever studied, then the third. 3 fins, 3 separate wake trails diverging from a single body. She had her tablet out. He was already recording, already wrong-footing her own disbelief, because the scientist in her was faster than the part of her that wanted to scream. The body was perhaps 18 meters. The heads, and there were 3 of them, and she made herself look at all 3, were spaced along a widened anterior trunk, each one a distinct great white cranium, each one moving with a degree of autonomy that the shared musculature shouldn't have permitted. The leftmost head turned toward the constant. The eye was the size of a dinner plate. It was not afraid of them. Nothing about it was afraid of anything. "Get us moving," Mara said to Greg, and her voice came out quieter than she expected, which she would later understand was the voice she used when the math stopped adding up. "Right now. Get us moving." They didn't make it to the station in any organized sense. What they found when they reached Persephone's coordinates was a debris field. Instrument panels, foam insulation, a single waterproof door still attached to its hinges floating at a 45-degree angle like a grave marker. The station had been 40 feet below the surface. Whatever had hit hard enough to push wreckage up through 40 feet of water and scatter it across a quarter-mile radius. 2 survivors were clinging to a fragment of the outer hull when the constant found them, Dr. Alara Ose, who was cut above her right eye and had a grip on that hull panel that Mara thought might have left permanent impressions in the fiberglass, and a graduate student named Dav, who was 19 years old and had stopped making sounds. Climbed over the railing with the efficiency of someone who has categorized her panic and filed it somewhere she could find it later. She took in Mara, the boat, the horizon, he said. "It hunts by turbulence and chemical gradient, the garbage patch. That's where it came from. That's what it's eating. Solved polyurethane, microplastic columns, the bacteria that break them down. It's been sustaining itself on the patch for I don't know how long, years maybe. It's been growing in the patch for years and we put our station on top of its feeding ground." "What is it?" Allison asked, camera already up. Osi looked at her with an expression that wasn't quite contempt and wasn't quite pity. "I don't have a taxonomic answer for you. I have a behavioral one. It's territorial, it's hungry. And it is very, very angry that we're still here." Ryan said, "So we leave." He said it like it was obvious, like he'd solved it. Nobody answered him because at that moment the water on the port side erupted and the leftmost head of the creature cleared the gunwale by 3 feet. And they learned several things simultaneously. That it could breach, that each head moved on something approaching independent decision-making, and that the sound it made, a low resonant pressure wave more felt than heard, was capable of vibrating the fillings in your back teeth. Greg floored the throttle. The sloop lurched, and the head came down wrong, clipping the stern rail instead of the deck, and then they were moving and the creature was behind them, and for 45 seconds everyone on that boat, They breathed like they were running. Then the middle head surfaced 20 meters ahead of them. It had flanked them. While the left head distracted, the middle head had repositioned. Team. Mara stood at the bow watching it idle there, blocking their path, and felt something cold and clarifying move through her. Not fear. She was past fear, the way you get past a temperature by going through it. This was something more useful. This was her brain saying, it coordinates. The heads share information. Not three animals. It's one animal with three decision-making nodes, and it's smarter than a shark has any right to be, and it's hurting us. Turn south, she said. South is open water. It wants us to go east. The garbage patch is east. It's herding us back towards its feeding ground. Turn south. There's an atoll 12 miles. We make for that. Osi looked at her. Something passed between them, the recognition of one kind of mind by another. She's right, Osi said simply. Fear. They made the atoll in just under an hour, running hard, the creature pacing them at a distance that felt deliberate. Close enough to be seen, far enough to let them think they were winning. Ryan kept saying they were losing it. Mara kept watching the three wake trails in the instrument readout and not agreeing. The atoll was a crescent of coral and scrub, barely above the waterline, the kind of geographic accident that doesn't appear on commercial charts. Theme. There was a ruined weather monitoring installation from the 1990s, a cistern of brackish water, and a satellite uplink antenna that was mostly corrosion and grief. And there was a young man sitting on a fuel drum, watching them come in, with the expression of someone who has spent enough time alone with something terrible that another human face feels like hallucination. His name was Marcus. He'd been the sole survivor of a research dive team whose boat had gone down 72 hours earlier. He'd seen things he was still translating into words. What he had managed to communicate by the time Mara sat across from him and made him drink water and just talk was this. The creature had been at the atoll before. It came and went, seemed to track them more by their waste. Their fuel exhaust, their bilge discharge, their sunscreen, and sweat dissolving into the water, than by sound or sight. Themes. It had learned to approach from the windward side where the chemical plume was strongest. It's using our pollution as a scent map, Mara said. Our garbage created it, Osi said. He said it flatly like a diagnosis. The microplastic accumulation in the patch created a chemical environment for accelerated mutation. We fed it, we shaped it. Theme. And now it follows us because we smell like food. It learned to come ashore, on the beach on the north side. It can drag itself. The bodies are on the north side. Nobody went to the north side. What they had on the atoll was 2 working outboard motors from the tender boats, which were too small for the open ocean but functional, approximately 60 liters of diesel, the corrosion-eaten satellite uplink, which Mara spent 3 hours rebuilding from its own bones, and some wiring from the weather station, and Greg, who turned out to know things about marine engines that he hadn't mentioned, and Ryan, who was less useful than he believed himself to be, but did not break down when it mattered, which Mara came to consider an underrated quality. And one other thing, one critical thing, the garbage. Theme. The atoll had been collecting it for years. Plastic bottles, netting, foam pellets, the slow accumulation of everything the Pacific had been catching from the human world. There were bags and bags of it in the weather station's equipment shed, collected by the same researchers who'd been studying it, bagged and cataloged and never retrieved. Attracted to the chemical signatures of degrading plastic, Mara said. They were all in the equipment shed, rain coming now, the sky gone the color of old iron, specifically to the dimethyl sulfide that bacteria produce when they colonize polyurethane foam, the same palm that draws seabirds to plastic. They evolved to associate the smell with krill. The creature didn't evolve to associate it with anything. It just ate enough of it that it became the primary food signal. You're saying it's addicted, Greg said. I'm saying we can use it. The plan was not elegant. Plans made in equipment sheds in the rain with 6 people and dwindling diesel rarely are. But it had the quality of correctness, the cold, clean feeling of a solution that fits, even if the fitting hurts. Osi would take 1 motor tender east, making noise, burning fuel, trailing wake. Decoy. Quid before anyone could suggest it, with the same efficiency she'd used climbing over the railing, and looked at Dav, still mostly silent, still somewhere interior, and said to him, quietly, "You're going with Mara, not a question, a reassignment of protective intent. Marquis take the second tender, loaded with every bag of collected garbage, and circle north, away from Osi's decoy run, and at a specific coordinate, which Mara calculated from the creature's observed behavioral patterns and wrote on Marcus's forearm in waterproof marker. He would open every bag into the water, create a plume, a feast. Not of actual food, but of the chemical signal the creature had rewired its entire biology around. And Mara, Greg, Allison, Ryan, and Dav would take the constant running with the satellite uplink now transmitting. She'd gotten it working, barely on a Coast Guard emergency frequency, and they would go west. The one direction the creature hadn't herded them, because west led away from the garbage patch, away from the plume, and the creature's conditioning had a geography to it, a directionality. West was uninteresting. West smelled like nothing it wanted. It would work, or it wouldn't. She had told them 70% and believed 65. What she hadn't planned for, what nobody had, was that the creature had been pacing the atoll while they planned, waiting. And when Osi's tender cleared the reef line and the creature turned toward it with that terrible coordinated grace, the rightmost head didn't follow. It held position, watching the constant, 3 heads, 3 decision-making nodes. One of them had done the math differently. Mara saw it from the wheelhouse. The rightmost head stationary in the water at the atoll's southern gap, the one exit the constant needed to reach open ocean. Greg saw it too. He looked at her and she looked at the gap, maybe 30 meters across, maybe 18 meters of creature. "Can we make it?" Allison asked. Greg's hands were on the throttle. He said nothing. Mara thought about what Osi had said. It tracks by chemical plume, their fuel exhaust, their wake, their smell. She thought about Dav, who hadn't spoken in 3 days and was sitting in the stern with his knees pulled up, watching the water with eyes that had learned something she hoped she never would. He thought about the dissertation she'd defended 2 weeks ago. 3 years of data on thermocline disruption, on how human systems disturb natural ones, on the feedback loops that turn small intrusions into catastrophic reorganizations. She went below. She came back with every chemical they had, cleaning solution, diesel additive, the contents of the first aid kit's antiseptic bottles. He went to the starboard side, away from the gap, away from the head watching them. "What are you doing?" Ryan asked. "Giving it something to look at," she said, and she poured everything overboard. A chemical cascade into the water, pungent, complex, the opposite of the subtle diesel and sweet signature the creature had been tracking. The rightmost head turned, not much, not for long. A fractional reorientation toward the chemical source, the deep automated pull of a stimulus response system that hadn't been built for nuance. But a fractional reorientation was enough, and Greg was already pushing the throttle before she'd even straightened up. The constant went through the gap at full speed, the rightmost head 6 meters to starboard, close enough for Mara to see the texture of the skin, the old scars of encounters with shipping debris. The pale scoring where fishing nets had abraded it across years of growing up in the garbage field, the evidence written in its body of everything humanity had put into the ocean. And then they were through, and open water was ahead, and the satellite uplink was still transmitting, and Greg was laughing a single disbelieving syllable over and over, and Dav was saying something, finally, the words, coming back in a voice that was still learning how to be used. The Coast Guard cutter reached their position 3 hours and 40 minutes later. Circle. Osi's tender was already there, circling, the doctor sitting in the bow with a thermos of something and a face that had put everything in its correct compartment. Marcus reached them 11 minutes after, smelling like the inside of a plastic recycling facility, grinning with all of his teeth. The creature was not there. The chemical plume Marcus had created had worked. It had drawn the animal east and north and into the open Pacific, tracking a ghost meal that dissolved as fast as it dispersed. It would come back. Osi said this plainly to the Coast Guard lieutenant who had the foresight not to argue with her tone. Thank her. It would come back because the garbage patch was still there, because the chemical attractant wasn't going anywhere, because you don't fix in a day what you built across a century. But it wasn't there now. And Mara had 11 people on a sloop instead of in the water, and the satellite uplink was still transmitting, broadcasting coordinates and behavioral data and everything she'd recorded since the first breach, all the footage, Allison's camera and her own tablet, an empirical account of what the Pacific had made out of what they'd put into it. On the cutter's deck, wrapped in a foil blanket that crinkled every time she moved, Mara finished writing her field notes. He wrote them in the same voice she'd used for her dissertation, precise, conditional, stripped of the language of drama, because that was the only language that would be heard by the people who needed to hear it. She wrote about chemical conditioning and behavioral plasticity, and what happens when an apex organism adapts to the largest artificial feature on the planet's surface. He wrote about the way it had herded them, and the way the heads coordinated and the thing it had become. She wrote, "The organism is not a monster, it is a measurement, and it is what 3 million square miles of accumulated human waste looks like when something biological decides to eat it. The question it poses is not how do we destroy it. The question it poses is what did we think was going to happen?" She sent the notes to her university server, to 3 scientific journals, to a Coast Guard environmental office she'd looked up on the cutter's Wi-Fi. Then she leaned her head back against the bulkhead. Across the deck, Dav was talking to Marcus in a low, continuous stream, words coming out like something had finally been unplugged. Allison was reviewing footage. Ryan, Was telling someone on a satellite phone that he'd been the one to navigate through the gap, and Greg was listening to this with the patient expression of a man who has decided not to correct the petered. Osi sat down next to Mara. She had a second thermos and she held it out. Your calculations, Osi said, 65%. Ed 70. I rounded up, I know. Osi's expression wasn't quite a smile. I did the same math. I didn't want to say 65. She looked out at the water, at the flat gray Pacific stretching all the way to a horizon that had nothing on it. It's still out there, yes, we built it. We should probably be the ones to unbuild it. That's going to take longer than a field expedition, I know. Osi took her thermos back and stood up. Better start writing.